What's up, hobby friends? My name is Casey and welcome to another miniature rescue. Today, I'm going to do my best to rescue a Forgeworld Troggoth Hag for Warhammer Age of Sigmar. The Troggoth Hag is by far one of my absolute favorite miniatures out there. The sculpt is incredibly unique, and the amount of details packed into this model gives you so much variety to paint that you can really take your time and just discover new things each time you sit down to paint the model. I picked up this model on eBay not too long ago for about $20 less than the price on the Forgeworld website, which really isn't actually too bad. If you can find this model in stock on the Forgeworld website, probably better to just buy it directly, just in case there are issues with the casting and it needs to be swapped out for a better one. In my case, I got kinda lucky. I saved a little bit of cash and got a partially assembled model. Of course, there ended up being some problems with the model the closer I looked, and it was a little bit of a letdown. But the whole idea is to put in some work and rescue the model. So let's get to it. First off, let's take a look at what a good Forgeworld model looks like. Here's a screen grab directly from the Forgeworld website. As you can see, there are gaps between the pieces of the model, which is normal, but in my experience, worse quality and consistency through Forgeworld than pretty much any other resin company kit manufacturer out there. And this is the one they show you on the website to convince you to buy it. My model has larger gaps, and there is some warping on the arms to the extent that the hand with the wooden staff won't actually fit properly onto the model, even when the seams are as close as I can get it. So we need to offset the parts a little and try and pin them into place. I'll cut down some paper clips and position them between the two pieces. This will give me a stronger internal bond and allow me to adjust the position regardless of how the parts are actually supposed to fit together. There may be larger gaps for now, but since we have to fill them anyways, it's not much more work than we were already planning on doing. After the model has been assembled, I get out my favorite gap filling tool, Milliput. I take a little ball of each component and mix them together to make a nice little paste. I lightly wet my fingers to keep the putty from sticking to them, and I begin to lay down thin lines into the gaps. Using a rubber tip sculpting spool and a little excess water, I smooth out the putty to fill out the gaps and blend with the model's curves as best I can. Unfortunately, there are gaps all over the place on this model, so I try and take my time and fill everything in. I find it easiest to get a little more Milliput than I need into a gap and then wet my fingers with water to start to dissolve it a little bit. That way it slips into the cracks and I can smooth it over at the same time. Milliput takes about 4 hours to dry, and then you can safely sand it down and make it very smooth and flush with the body. Now that the model has been assembled, a process that takes 10 times longer than any plastic model in existence, we can prime it and start to get ready to paint. Using my airbrush, I prime the model using Stynylrez Black, then follow that up with a pretty liberal coating of white ink from the top down. Since most of this model will end up being pretty bright colors, I want to go a little heavy with the white ink. There is still black left in the larger recesses, but since the model is so large, we should be able to paint in most of the shadows after the fact. So we don't need a full-on zenithal highlight to do any of that light to dark work for us. On one hand, that's a nice thing because we have a large canvas that will be fun to paint. On the other hand, I can't rely on an easy trick to create more contrast. I need to paint bravely and get it looking right all on my own. Before we get to the main portion of the painting, I want to get some good references going so I know what to look out for and give me some color ideas. I want something that has a lot of bright colors, but a really nasty green skin that looks properly swampy too. Here's some of the pictures I saved on my computer to use as reference materials. This model really stands out to me. I like the extra conversion bits as well, but I'm really drawn to the coloring of the ears and the fins. That blue and orange combo looks great, and I think I have just the paints to accomplish that look pretty well. The way that this face looks is definitely an eye catcher. I've never really put any real time into painting eyes, but the scale of this model pretty much demands that I at least give it a shot, or this hag will look incomplete. So I want to try to replicate this type of eyeball, pretty realistic looking. So the plan is set, and the model is ready to go. Time to get out all the paints and see what happens. I start with a base coat of Deathworld Forest, then down with some extra flow improver to try and take advantage of what little bit of zenithal we do have left. It won't be a ton of extra light information, but it will serve as enough of a map to start pushing the lights and darks. I come in with some pink flesh tone to break up the green and make the skin feel a little more alive. This is usually my go-to for green skin. I just like the way it looks on orcs and goblins, and a giant green hag definitely falls into that same camp. I try to focus this color on anything that could be thought of as thinner skin and in some of the deeper recesses on the muscles. It gives me that look of soft skin surrounded by hardened leathery green skin and scales for even more protection. Next up, I'm going to grab some orange and fill in the fins of the model. A dark green blue looks perfect with the green skin and orange fins, and it's really starting to bring out the look of this awesome model. After the base coat's dry, I want to bring it all together with a greenish brown oil wash. This will get color into the micro details and start to blend the colors together as a filter of grime. I mix up a nice wash and apply it all over the painted parts of the model. It does an awesome job right out of the gate, really bringing out the colors and really unifying the skin. Now all we have to do is wait for that to dry. Okay, now that the oil wash is all dry, it's time to start bringing out the details on the skin. Using the base coat colors, I begin to blend them into the skin, bringing out a little more vibrancy and color. Using my Redgrass Games wet palette, I'm able to keep colors going for quite a while and get a really nice mix of colors. I continue to go back and forth, painting around any of the recessed wash we just did, and creating brighter and brighter highlights moving up towards the top of the body. Like I said earlier, this is one of my favorite models for Age of Sigmar, and I really want to do this justice. So I'm going to try and take my time painting each section of the model. The arm I started on is just the beginning. There are a ton of little details all over the model, and I want to spend time with each one until I run out of time for this week. I've never done this with a model before. I usually have a pretty tight schedule and deadline to get a model done, but now that I can take a little more time, I want to see what kind of difference I can make. The next major detail I want to tackle are the eyes. One of them in particular is a little larger than most Warhammer eyes, so I want to try and go full on TRYHARD and make it as realistic as I can. Luckily, I have some awesome reference photos, so I'll try and work off that to achieve that look. It took a little doing, but I started with a nice half circle of blue in the upper middle of the eye. I followed this up with a small circle of white so I could blend that in and get a nice reflection going on the bottom of the iris. I went back and forth with the blue that I used and wet blended the iris together. Then I laid in a small black dot for the pupil. I did leave these for a minute to dry and then came back in with a super tiny brush to place white reflection marks in the eye. One on top, a little less bright, and then two larger ones at the bottom right to really bring out that reflection. On top of all that, I glazed in some red toward the outsides of the eyeball, and it gave it a really nice bloodshot look. For real, this is hands down the best eyeball I've ever painted. I can't even begin to explain how happy I am about this super tiny detail. Going back to the skin for a minute, I'm going to very lightly dry brush some of the blue over the scaly areas, adding in a little white to bring it up just a tiny bit so you can see them. I want to pick out the tips of each scale so I can go back later with a brush and bring those highlights up even more. But getting the dry brush to pick out each of those scales is much less time consuming than going in with a regular brush on the first pass. Again, this was a really time-consuming part of the project, but the way it ended up turning out, I don't regret spending that extra time on anything. There are still a couple of larger details that haven't even been started on this model. The staff, the bag, and the base all need insane amounts of work. Starting with the large stick she's holding, I cover the whole thing with some Arbuckle's Brown from scale 75. Each part gets a good helping of brown and then just a little bit of ivory wet blended onto the highlights. Lots of back and forth here as well, but I get pretty much everything looking pretty nice with just those two colors. The bag she is holding could be considered an entire project on its own. In this net, there are signs of living creatures, armor, skeleton bones, bottles, barrels, and all sorts of plant life. There's just a ton of stuff to paint in this bag. I go around the bag a few times and pick out as many of the individual pieces as I can. All of the objects were presumably buried in a swamp when she came across them, so I don't want to go overboard with the details that will be covered in dirt. Once I was happy with the level of detail poking out of the bag, I covered the whole thing in a heavy wash of Agrak's Earthshade. This darkened everything down and was just enough grime to let you see what the bag has to offer, but not give too much away. It also blends into the body a little bit, so the focal point is now on the face of the model. After these details were filled in, the model was pretty much done. I spent another day painting these things in before starting the base as well, trying my best to make something I could be really proud of. Still, the base is left, and that needs to be just as awesome as the paint job. I decided I would do a resin pour and really sell that swamp look I was after in the Cruel Boys video I did a couple weeks ago. Right here, if you haven't seen it. It's a good one too. I started by gathering all of my swampy textures and laying them out in front of me. I wanted to make this swamp look like it had a lot of variety in colors and textures. We have yellows, reds, greens, and browns to make things look good. And then all we can do is pray that the resin doesn't ruin the entire thing. I scooped up a ton of mud around the rock pile she was standing on. This makes it look like she's coming home from a long day of hauling up garbage, strategically walking through the muddy swamp, one stable rock footing at a time. Or at least that's what I'm telling myself. I placed plants all around the rocks, and a few just coming up through the cracks, or at the corners of the mud where the rock and mud kind of meet. All over. I made sure to get a good variety of color all throughout, and in the end, sprinkled some red flowers onto the whole thing. This really gave it that little bit of extra contrast on the base and tied all the plants together really nicely. Now it's time for the resin pour. Now I've done realistic water effects before, and even then, not always successfully. So this time, I went out and bought some proper 2-part pouring resin for projects just like this. I measured out equal parts of the resin mix and added 1 drop of brown and green ink to the mix to get that nasty swamp water. It was just enough to be a little bit dirty, but still completely see-through so you can see all the nice plants and rocks on the base. Okay, so it turns out that I did get a couple leaks, but they were pretty small, and all I had to do was put some extra hot glue on those areas to stop those leaks. Before we get to the reveal, I just want to say thank you for watching another miniature rescue. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe as it really helps out the channel. And a big thank you to all of the patrons who keep this channel working week to week. I really couldn't do this without you, so thank you. And with that, here is the rescued Forgeworld Troggoth Hag. I am so happy with the way that this turned out. Not only did the resin come out properly, it completely elevates this model to a whole another, just a whole other level. The time I spent feels well worth it, and I feel like I actually did some justice to this model. I hope you enjoyed this one as much as I did. Thank you again for joining me. Once again, my name is Casey, and I will see you in the next video.